Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is having an amazing Data Science Connect virtual conference experience. Hopefully you can see and hear me. And if you can, I'd love to get just a hello in the chat so I know that everything is working. My name is Maura, and today we're going to be talking about navigating the data danger zone, which is evaluating and building data literacy in a growing organization. As you have questions, if you have thoughts as we go through, feel free to pop them into the Q&A or into the chat. Would love to know how folks think about this concept and about what we're going to talk about today. So let's get started with a little introduction to Patreon. I run the data science team at Patreon, and our mission is to fund the creative class. And right now we have a membership product that makes it really easy for creators to get paid by their fans through recurring monthly subscriptions. So you may support your favorite podcaster on Patreon, or your favorite YouTuber, or maybe a writer or illustrator. And what's really exciting about Patreon right now is we're in a large and a growing market. There's this survey done of teenagers in the in the UK, and what they found is that 34% of those teenagers wanted to be a YouTuber when they grew up, and 18% wanted to be a blogger, and 16% wanted to be a musician. So Patreon is trying to make it so that when those teenagers grow up, they can actually make a living from their art. And of course, there are millions of creators around the world now who we're trying to serve through recurring membership, so they don't need to rely as much on ad monetization or brand deals or any of that. A quick kind of context on the team and how big we are to help you understand the sort of data space we're operating in. So we have around 200,000 creators using the platform and 6 million patrons. And we're a global company. We operate in over 180 countries around the world. And right now the team is roughly 200 folks. And we have a data science team that supports the entire rest of the company with all the data they need to make great decisions. So let's define the data danger zone. This is a tweet that came from our CEO, Jack. And what this tweet said is we had just launched this product called Special Offers that allowed creators to run a limited time offer on their page. So for example, if you joined, within 30 days, you would get a special benefit as a patron. And Jack tweeted and said, "Creators, I'm beaming right now. In September, we worked with about 50 Patreon creators on a technique to help them grow their memberships. This was one of the most impactful projects we've literally ever seen in the history of the company. More info coming soon." And then you can see this graph of the median dollars from new and increased pledges and this increase of 288%. So we're going to try to figure out where the data danger zone is in this graph. In this tweet. And to me, it's here. We have this median dollars, which if you're working with data, you should be interesting. Why is there a median there? Maybe there are some big outliers, which is why we may have not used an average. You see this plus 288%. And then you see, 50 creators is the sample that Jack is referring to. So when I see this as a data leader, it kind of makes my heart beat. I'm thinking there's probably an opportunity that we are misinterpreting the data here to a very large audience of, the tens of thousands of creators that follow Jack on Twitter. So the data danger zone is the space. It's the space between you and the person receiving your interpretation of the data. And why is it dangerous? It's dangerous because within that space, there are a lot of expectations and a lot of assumptions. So anytime someone is interpreting the data that you're telling them about, they're expecting, some level of rigor. Maybe they're expecting some sort of sample size. Maybe they're expecting some sort of methodology. And then there are assumptions that go into any analysis or any model or any project that may not be communicated across that data danger zone. And sometimes that data danger zone is really small, right? You're a data scientist and you're talking to another data scientist and you say, "Hey, it looks like our AUC improved." And another data scientist is going to know what AUC means, and maybe they have the context of the model you're working on. And so they're like, "Cool, that's not a lot to navigate." But other times the data danger zone looks like this. You, a data scientist, are saying, "Hey, the response metric for our experiment is trending in the right direction." And then maybe you're saying that to your product manager and they say, "Wow, actually that's promising." And then their boss hears, "Hey, our experiment is going well." And suddenly you have the CEO saying, "Our new product works." That's, this is a danger zone that you need to navigate. So we're going to talk about that and how I thought about doing that at Patreon, and hopefully how you can do it within your organization. So we're going to talk about evaluating data literacy, communicating uncertainty, condensing information wisely, updating mental models, and then correcting with kindness when needed. So let's first start with evaluating data literacy. one of the most important things you can do is understand where your stakeholders, your partners, the other people you're working with are coming from when they think about interpreting data. And a great way to get a sense of this is to look at the questions that are being asked across the organization. This is just a sample of some of the questions the data science team at Patreon has gotten literally in the last few weeks. So we have someone saying, I came across this chart showing conversion, and it looks like there's a pretty steep drop in the past week or so. You have someone else saying, have we ever taken a look at retention rates from US patrons versus European patrons? Then you have a third person asking, is there a doc somewhere with information about how our homepage, which is patreon.com, performs? How do people get there, and how does it perform? And then what are our current available metrics showing revenue by performance by UTM parameter, part of a URL? So you can see different levels of literacy here. We have someone who understands conversion rates. We have someone who understands that there's like retention differences maybe between different segments of users. And I think that looking at the kinds of questions your data team is getting, or maybe you're getting if you're a data team of one or the only data person in your organization, really helps you understand the baseline you're working from. So a few things that I think about here. The first is like key user and business segmentations. Hopefully this is the easiest thing for people to start to grok and understand, who are your target customers, what key segmentations, whether that's regions or types of customers, are important to your business. That should be some pretty basic data literacy that everyone at the organization can learn within their first few weeks. The second is metrics basics. And I call this basics, but I actually think there's a lot here that folks who don't work with data on a daily basis have to learn. This is, what conversion means, understanding rates and growth rates. Is it month over month or year over year? Understanding units of measurement, that average versus median that we talked about. And then a big one I see is like absolute versus relative change. I'll see someone communicate and say, hey, we saw a 5% increase in this metric. It's actually a 5 percentage point increase, which might be a 20% increase. And so educating people about the difference between those two. And then, of course, kind of on the more advanced and hopefully for most organizations, not too advanced, statistical concepts. So do you understand power and confidence and sample size? And this isn't even getting to even more advanced ideas like talking about machine learning and error rates and all of that. So what you can do here is ask what kinds of questions are your teammates asking? What mistakes have you seen? So where have you seen people go wrong? And then maybe also what highlights have you seen? Who within the organization is talking about data in a correct way? And maybe you can positively reinforce that. The second concept for navigating the danger zone is communicating uncertainty. So we recently launched currencies at Patreon. So a creator here on the left can make their pricing tiers on their page in US dollars. And then fans from the UK will see those in British pounds, and fans from the Eurozone will see them in euros. And we had tons of people across the organization ask, how does pledge conversion, how does the likelihood of a fan to become a patron we know if they convert better? We didn't run any randomized experiments here, but I pulled out like language that this data scientist used in the presentation about it and said, hey, it's hard to say because it really depends on the campaigns, which is for us, the creators. We did not run a proper A/B test to measure it. Most campaigns are still using USD. We kind of just launched this in the last few months. And large Euro and GBP campaigns have higher average pledge conversion significantly. So this is just a really clear way to say like, hey, here's where the bias is. Here's the uncertainty. You have all these stakeholders across the organization saying, okay, is pledge conversion higher for these campaigns that have multi-currency enabled? And really kind of laying out exactly why we can't say whether that's true or not from a causal perspective. So some things that you can do here, I think the big one is to list your assumptions. In any analysis that you're making, you have choices around how you're doing it, what's going into your model. And so listing those out and clearly communicating them is key. Where possible, obviously use confidence intervals. I think if you can get your organization in the practice of understanding confidence and understanding where something is meaningful and not. And then, of course, acknowledging analytical bias. So in this example, we talked about saying, hey, most of the creators who have enabled this feature have a bias of some sort. They're larger creators. They tend to have higher pledge conversion for us. And so really calling that out and saying this sample is biased and here's the way in which it is biased. The third thing you can do is to condense information wisely. any long analysis that you have, you've spent maybe months on it or weeks, no one is going to read the entire doc. And so you're going to have some sort of executive summary. Maybe you're sharing it to Slack. Maybe you're presenting it in a meeting. There's going to need to be some condensing of information. And what I'll encourage you to do is to think wisely about how you do that. So back in the day, Patreon used to do monthly growth updates. We went in front of the whole company and talked about our key metrics. And I got made fun of a little bit because I kept using the phrase just okay. I would say our overall monthly growth rate, was X%, which is just okay. And the reason I use that phrase is because it's very hard to pull it to either polar side of it's amazing or it's tanking. And what I find, especially with condensing information, is that folks who don't work with data often will pull it into the really high positive or the really high negative. They'll see a summary that says it's trending in the right direction. And when they communicate it, they'll be like, we're beating our goals and we're really exceeding what we're trying to do. So that phrase just okay was meant to really be super neutral. If someone, came from that presentation and said our growth rate's fantastic, I'd be able to say, hey, you're really misinterpreting what I said. I said our growth rate was just okay. So a few things here. Making the takeaways memorable. One of the folks I work with likes to use the phrase boatloads when something is really strong. So we're getting boatloads of new patrons or boatloads of new creators. Pretty hard to obviously that is not a number, but to misinterpret the actual trend or the kind of meaning behind that. And then the other important thing about takeaways is if you strip out the nuance in your condensing of the information, they will too. So, if you have something that's not statistically significant, or if there's a really important assumption that was put into that analysis, pull that out into the takeaway and say, hey, this is trending in the right direction, or what we see between these two populations is X, Y, and Z. But there's a key piece of bias here that I want to make sure anyone reading the summary understands. So those are two things you can do there to help with the danger zone. The fourth idea is to remember mental models. It's really important to know that, when your teammates, especially in the product team, I would say if you're working within a product team, a software product team, are thinking about data, they're often thinking about mental models. What are our users doing? What are they thinking? How are they behaving? And so anytime you can tie your data work to those mental models, it's going to help them update their assumptions and their beliefs. We recently ran an experiment where we showed a little box that explained what Patreon is to fans who landed on the creator page. So as you can see, it says, the Try Guys, you land on their page. And then we had this little box that said, by becoming a patron of the Try Guys, you'll be an active participant in their creative process. And what we believed, our hypothesis in running this A/B test, was that fans would be more motivated to become patrons because they would understand what Patreon is. But we failed to find a significant effect on conversion rate and one of our other response metrics, cents per device. And most surprisingly, we didn't observe an effect based on whether the user had already been a patron of another creator or not, which is pretty interesting because our hypothesis was, this is explaining Patreon to fans who don't understand it. So we thought maybe existing patrons, they already know the explanation. And so this box is going to do nothing, but maybe brand new fans, this box is going to help them understand Patreon. And so this idea of most surprisingly, was something that the data scientist kind of pulled out to update that mental model of the PM or of the product person reading this analysis. So a few ideas here. The first is to highlight where your assumptions were wrong. So saying, hey, we thought that fans would change in a certain way, but they didn't. And then connecting your analysis to the mental model teammates have of your users. So how do fans behave versus how do patrons behave is a key one for us at Patreon. Thinking about how your product managers are understanding your users and making sure your analysis is tying into that. Finally, the last idea here is to correct others when needed. So going back to this initial data danger zone and what we saw with this median dollars from new and increased pledges and this plus 288%, what's interesting here is, at some times I've needed to go to other folks within the organization and say, hey, you really misrepresented this analysis, or the way you talked about this was not as rigorous as I'd like to see us be when we talk about A/B testing. But this analysis and this chart actually came from a much larger analysis that was a really thorough look at this alpha of this product that we had built and had pretty nuanced understanding of what did these creators do? How did they use it? How did they perform? And the thing is, this was the most exciting graph, of course, in that entire analysis. And so if you see someone, just taking out the most exciting part and not talking about the parts that maybe weren't as exciting, that's an opportunity for you to help someone get a more nuanced and understanding view of what's happening within the data. Saying, hey, I noticed you pulled out the most exciting chart. There's actually way more to this analysis, and this is a really small sample size. And so let's actually wait until this rolls out to more creators so we can understand this product in full. And a few things here, like identifying where rigor matters most. There are some cases where, the goal of a CEO in communicating this data is just to motivate your customers and to help them get excited about the product. So understanding those motivations, sometimes rigor will really matter there. And sometimes it can be, just a summary statistic if that's what it needs to be. And then I do think that if things went wrong within that danger zone, within that communication, within you setting expectations and then hopefully meeting them, owning it as a data science leader and a data science team, saying, hey, we initially published and said this metric was trending 20% positively, but maybe we found some mistakes or we found some errors or corrected some assumptions, and here's what we see now. So making sure you are apologizing where things are wrong and owning it, and helping your organization overall become more rigorous with data. So to recap, a few things that I've liked to do to navigate this danger zone: evaluating data literacy, understanding where your stakeholders are coming from in working with data and using data, communicating uncertainty when possible and bringing out those assumptions and biases right up to the forefront, being wise about how you condense information and summarize takeaways to your stakeholders, connecting your data work to mental models of the organization, and then, of course, correcting with kindness when needed. Thank you so much for listening today. If you have questions or thoughts and want to reach out, there's my information. And I hope everyone has an amazing rest of Data Science Connect.